Let's take a first stab at it and say, well, the owl is the thing that's ruling, the world is the thing that's ruled. Unfortunately, it's a bit complicated, but consider this. The world is ruled by the owl. YouTube, welcome back. We are about to jump in and talk a little bit about case. We got a lot of stuff to deal with in the world of case. You know, you can read whole books on it if you want. We're going to do a little bit of clearing up of terminology first, and then we're going to see what we can do after that. But the terminology, that's the stuff that we got to get down, because it actually does get a little bit confusing, and the terminology is among the worst in linguistics. I think case terminology is pretty bad. So, without further ado, let's go to the side webcam, and let's see a blank screen. Excellent. Yeah, okay. So, case. I'm going to start us from like the very, very basic bottom floor of the case skyscraper. I'm going to be mixing metaphors like it's no one's business here today. Just fair warning. Okay. So what is case? If I were to give a kind of dictionary definition of it and say it's a system of marking nouns for their relationship to other elements within the clause or sentence. And if we can get a little more specific, case is a system for marking dependents relationships to their heads. So within a phrase, we have the notion of a head, which we can kind of pre-theoretically think of as the most important element of that phrase. So if we look at a phrase like the big owl, what's the most sort of what is this basically? A big owl is basically an owl, right? So we would think of this in a pre-theoretical sense as a phrase, a noun phrase headed by the noun owl. It's a noun phrase because its head is a noun. So whatever kind of element is the head of the phrase, that's what kind of phrase it is. So rules the world. Is this a kind of world, or is this a kind of ruling? It's a kind of ruling. So we have a verb phrase with a head rule. Now, I did mention pre-theoretical a few times during that because there are different theories that use the word head in slightly different ways, but let's stay sort of zoomed out in this kind of basic linguistics level. All right, so the big owl rules the world. Together, we have a nice sentence. The big owl rules the world, noun phrase and a verb phrase. So this is some old style syntax, but sentence equals noun phrase and a verb phrase. The big owl rules the world. That's just a little aside for those who are interested in the more syntactic side of things. Obviously, sentences do get a bit more complicated than that as time goes on. Okay, we talked about heads. And we talked about how case is a way of signaling the relationship of a noun to the rest of the clause. Or if we think of it in terms of heads, we have the head of the clause, which can be thought of as the verb. Again, being a bit pre-theoretical here, because there are other theories that will tell you different, but so the big owl rules the world. Fundamentally, this is an instance of ruling. We're talking about this is the action. The big owl is ruling the world. So the head of this is rules. The head of this clause or this sentence is rules. So the things that interact with, the things that sort of hang off of this head are its dependents. So in this case, we have the head, which is rules, and the dependents. We have two dependents. The big owl, that's one, and the world. So here the head is a verb and the dependents are two noun phrases. The big owl and rules the world. Okay, so the big owl rules the world, head, dependents. What is case? Case is a way of signaling the relationship of these two dependents to their head. What's another kind of... So this is a clause. That's one type of head-dependent relationship. Another one is possessor-possessed relationship. So the big owl's rule, or maybe say dominion. There we go. So here we have a possessor and a possessed, a possessum, if you will. So the possessor and possessum, meaning the thing possessed. So the big owl and dominion. Oop, dominion. Don't know why that jumped around like that. Okay. And so here we have we actually have the head being a noun phrase, being a noun dominion. So overall, the big owl's dominion is a noun phrase. The head is the possessum. So the dependent is the big owl. I'll write these a little bit more clearly like this. So we have the big owl and the world. These are the dependents. Here we only have one dependent, the big owl. So in both cases, the big owl is a dependent. Okay, and actually you can see the start of something that looks like case here, because note that to mark the fact that the big owl is a possessor, we have this z morphology on there. So we're signaling the relationship of the dependent, which is the big owl, to the head. Quick aside to look at the chat. We do have, you can still absolutely add your names to the fan service language. I would say put it in the Discord and just at me on there, or at Lucy, and one of us, and we'll get it sorted out. And if you have a preferred meaning, be sure to include that there. I don't have the spreadsheet open right now, otherwise I'd do it now. Okay, so here we are. Yeah, Sauten's got some comments on case. Okay, we will get to these. We will get to these comments. Although Sauten, feel free to hold court in the chat. For now, I'm just going to get through all of these definitions. So, case is going to be helping us to clarify the relationships of the dependents to their head. So it's a form of dependent marking. Case is a form of dependent marking that occurs on nouns. Okay, so let's get out of abstract land a little bit, and let's do a little bit of like conlanging just for the purpose of making up an example. So say we have a word for owl, which is something like hoo-hoo. Say we have a word for world, and the word for world is maybe something like patu, hoo-hoo, patu. And to rule is a verb like ila. Okay. So the big owl rules the world. We could just say the owl rules the world to make our lives a bit easier here. The owl's dominion or ruling. So if we were to make let's assume that we have an SVO word order. So if we have an SVO word order and nothing else that we know about the language, if we want to say the owl rules the world, we would say something like hoo-hoo ila patu, which we gloss as owl rule world. Okay, just ignoring agreement. There are two relationships. There are two dependents here, right? We have owl and world. So if this were a language that used case marking to mark the specific relationship of the dependent, the noun phrases, to the head, the verb, then we would put something maybe on the end of these. You might be thinking, well, we already know which is which. Something is ruling here and something is ruled. And we know which because we know this is a subject verb object language, right? So that's sort of irrelevant. Why do we need case? Well, language sometimes does things redundantly. You do get case marking in languages with a strict word order like this. Sometimes you have both, sometimes you have neither, but sometimes you have both. So let's take that case. So if we were to mark this, we need something that cries out saying, hey, I'm the subject, right? So let's say we have an affix like ta, and ta is going to say, I am the subject of this sentence. We'll get a little bit more into what a subject is in a second. But we're going to just say subject marker. And we need something for the object. So let's say something like nu. Nu is going to say, I'm the object. So huhuta ila patu nu. The owl subject rules the world object. All right. So, case. We are now entering the domain of case because we are distinguishing the subject from the object. And notice if, say we didn't have a fixed word order language, say we had a free word order language, then we could say something like huhu ta patu nu ila. And this would be owl subject, world object, rule. And crucially, the state of affairs in the world that this describes would be the same. The owl rules the world because the relationship of the owl and the world to the situation of ruling is expressed with these little markers on the nouns. Okay. All right. So far so good. We've got these little markers on the nouns. They're telling us what the relationship of the nouns is to the rest of the phrase. Let's move on. So I said subject and object, like those are things that everyone just can easily identify. But it's not necessarily the case. There's a bit of complication with what a subject and an object is. So in the sentence, the owl rules the world, I could tell you that the owl is the subject. Then we have our verb, and then we have our direct object, which I'll just abbreviate to object for now, the world. But me just telling you that isn't especially helpful. So we have to come up with a more general way of thinking about what a subject is and what an object is. And unfortunately, it's a bit complicated because let's take a first stab at it and say, well, the owl is the thing that's doing the action, right? The owl is the thing that's ruling. The world is the thing that's ruled. So it's the thing that's getting the action done to it. So we might, as a first attempt, say, well, the subject is whatever's doing the action, and the object is the thing that's having the action done to it. But consider this. The world is ruled by the owl. Now we know English is an SVO language. Let's just take that as given. So English is SVO, subject, verb, object. So the thing that's coming in front of the verb we expect to be the subject. But here, it's no longer the thing that's doing the action. It's the thing that's having the action done to it. And so this is a passive construction. And a passive construction in English and in many languages is defined as a construction in which the thing that has the action done to it is the subject. So we can see that subject isn't something that has a clear semantic meaning. It's not just the doer of the action. It's more of like a structural position in the sentence. And in English, we have verb agreement with the subject. So we have subject-verb agreement. So if I change the world to the worlds, we'd have to say the worlds are ruled by the owl. The owl has dominion over the many worlds. So that's a diagnostic for the subject in English. It's the thing the verb agrees with. So it's a bit abstract, this notion of subject. And in different constructions, the mapping between the subject and a particular semantic rule, like the thing that does the action, let's call that the agent. So here the owl is the agent. Agent. Owl is agent. I'm running out of space. Is the agent. In a prototypical active sentence, like the owl rules the world, the subject is an agent. In the prototypical passive sentence, the subject is not the agent. It's not the thing that does the action. It's the thing that has the action done to it. So what could we call that? We could call that a patient. It's something that is undergoing the action. So owl's agent, world is patient. So we have now three kind of levels of analyzing things. We have, let's see if I can go down here. We have subject versus object. We have what I've been calling subject case versus object case. We'll make that a bit more technical sounding soon. And then we have agent versus patient. So instead of subject case, we have a fancy name. This is nominative. And here's where the nomenclature comes in. This is a name that we've inherited as linguists from antiquity, from the classical period. Nominative and accusative. the naming case and the case of accusing. It's actually a poor translation from the Greek original, which I actually don't know. But that's why we call it accusative. All right. Okay, so we have these three layers. Let's give them different names. So here we have case, nominative versus accusative. So in English, these are things like he versus him, she versus her, they versus them, I versus me, we versus us. These are all nominative accusative distinctions, right? So the owl rules the world. Say the owl is a he, we say he rules the world. The owl rules the people, he rules them. Or if the owl is a she rules the world, she rules them. Not she rules they, right? Because in English, the direct object is going to want to take the accusative form. So we have this distinction, nominative versus accusative. Then we have subject versus object, and this is called not case, but grammatical function or a grammatical relation. And this is that kind of abstract thing. This is the position in the sentence that the main verb agrees with in English. So this is the thing that the subject, that the agent occupies in an active sentence and the patient occupies in a passive sentence. So this is this kind of abstract layer. Why have I separated? Well, okay, let's finish up and then I'll talk about the separation. Why have I separated agent and patient from subject and object? It's just because of things like this passive situation where there's not a match. It's not that the subject is always the agent. And so we can call this a semantic role or a thematic role or a theta role, which is probably the term that, different theoretical schools use different terms. The one I'm most familiar with is theta role. Okay, so, see, excellent stuff happening in the chat. Okay, we are going to continue. So why? So you know now why I've separated the idea of a grammatical function and a theta role, because they're not always one-to-one. Why have I separated grammatical function and case? Well, because nominative and accusative, these two categories in English, these things like he versus him, I versus me, you find accusative in instances when it's not a direct object. So there's an example like me and him are fighting, which is looked down upon prescriptively, but that's part of English, right? So here we have two subjects. The whole subject is me and him, and they're both in the accusative case, yet they're on the subject. So we get these kinds of interesting situations. And we get other situations where different cases show up on the subject. English doesn't really have these anymore, but it used to. You get other cases than you'd expect showing up on the subject sometimes. Cool. So the three layers: case, grammatical function, and theta role, semantic role, thematic role, whatever you want to call it. Okay. So English has a remnant of a case system in its pronouns, and then it has that apostrophe S thing that looks case-like, that expresses possession. Okay, so we've climbed up to one step of the mountain. We've come to base camp, or case camp. Just let that sink in for a minute. Okay, what next? I want to make a point about the names of cases, because this is something that's come up on the Discord. And by the way, people watching on YouTube, there's a Discord. Check out the link in the description. The names that we give to cases are just that. They are given to cases by people who are talking about them, people who are analyzing them, linguists in general, but also others. And it's not always possible or advisable to compare something called the nominative in one language to something called the nominative in another language. There's always an aspect of case which is language specific. So we have rules that we use to name these cases. Like generally when a linguist is analyzing a language and the linguist sees There's a case marker that goes on the subject of transitive verbs and the subject of intransitive verbs. I should talk about transitivity in a second. Then that linguist is probably going to say, gee, I'll call this nominative because this is kind of what we call nominatives. It's not the case. It's not so that there is some sort of abstract nominativeness that different languages just sort of partake in. These are sort of analytical categories that we put on the language. So what the language has, you could think of it as like form A, form B, form C. And form A is used for subjects. Form B is used for direct objects. And if we're talking about English, form B is also used in conjoined noun phrases, so me and him. And form C is used for possessors. But to make our lives a bit easier, we do give them these names. It's just not always true that you can compare them simply from one language to the next. Okay, because one language might use, in English, we have the accusative case that shows up in these conjoined noun phrases. This is not true in all languages that have nominative accusative. In many of these languages, these would show up as you'd really expect them to as nominative because they are subjects. Okay, so Logan saying in the chat that thematic rules and theta rules are different things. They can be considered different things depending on what theoretical persuasion you have. I'm trying to zoom out a bit. But yes, they're called theta rules because it's an abbreviation for thematic rules. Then there are people who have separated those two concepts. But we could be very general and just think of it as a semantic rule, if that's easy. Okay, so where were we? We've climbed up to case camp. We have been talking about case, grammatical function, semantic rules. What else do we have? Well, I mentioned transitive and intransitive verbs. Okay, so we could think of, let's think of two sentences like, the owl rules the world, and the owl rules. So one of these has a direct object and the other doesn't. And transitive is just a way of saying has a direct object. So this is a transitive sentence. This is an intransitive sentence. Yes, I spelled that right. Okay. So why do I bring this up? Well, let's look at our little toy language here. I'm going to try and clear out some of this stuff. So we have the owl rules the world, transitive. We could also just say the owl rules in general. So that would look maybe something like huhuta ila, owl. And now we're more sophisticated. We're going to say nominative instead of subject case. Let's change all of this. Accusative, nominative, accusative. Okay. So the owl rules. Whereas these mean the owl rules the world. Okay. Super. Note that when we have an intransitive sentence, we only have one dependent noun phrase, one argument in this case. So, I said case again. See, it's impossible. Why do we have to call this, why do we have to use the same thing here, huhuta, as here, huhuta? I mean, because there's only one argument here, we could just as easily say hu nu ila. It's kind of arbitrary. So there's no ironclad rule that says you have to treat the subject of a transitive sentence the same as the subject of an intransitive sentence. So let's come up with some, it looks like an accusative, right? But when this happens, we come up with a different nomenclature, and here's where it gets kind of tough. Kind of annoying, actually. So when we have this situation, so let's call this situation A. Subject of intransitive looks the same as the subject of transitive verbs. And the object of transitive verbs looks different. So you get one marker. Oops, there we go. You get one marker, say ta, for these two, and you'll get one marker nu for this one. That's situation A. Situation B, which this little toy language gives us the example of, puts the subject of an intransitive marked the same as the object of a transitive verb. For historical reasons, we call this nominative and accusative. For historical reasons, we call this ergative and absolutive. So if you've ever heard of ergativity, that's what this is referring to. It's referring to a situation where the subject of an intransitive verb is marked the same as the object of a transitive verb. In that case, we don't call that marker accusative, we call it absolutive. And we call the marker of the subject of the transitive verb ergative. So erg stands for ergative, abs stands for absolutive. I'll just write that down so everyone can see. And to make it easier to talk about these things, we have different abbreviations. So subject of an intransitive verb, we abbreviate this as S. Object of a transitive verb, or let's go subject of a transitive verb, we call this A, which stands for agent, but I've already worked so hard to distinguish subject and agent for you that I would just like you to think of it as A. And the only reason I bring this up is because you will see this everywhere that this is discussed, and you kind of have to know it if you want to read any of these papers. And then the final thing is P, which is the object of a transitive verb. So S, A, and P, we have these three participants. Here we have S equals A and P. Here we have A and S equals P. When S equals P, that's an ergative absolutive system. When S equals A, that is a nominative accusative system. So I should call this situation B. So situation B is ergative absolutive alignment. That's the term morphosyntactic alignment to describe the difference between these two kinds of systems. Here's nominative accusative alignment. Okay. So we have three. Let's see if I can just reiterate that, because I think it is a lot of stuff coming at you, and I think this is an important point. So S is the subject of an intransitive sentence. So here, I will just write down owl equals S. Subject of an intransitive sentence. The owl rules. Here, owl is an A, the subject of a transitive sentence or clause. And here, world is P, the object of a transitive clause. So S, A, and P. Nominative accusative alignment is when the form used to mark S is the same as the form used to mark A. So in this case, ta. Leaving out P. So P only occurs in transitive sentences, and we call that the accusative case. This is the nominative accusative system. This is the nominative accusative alignment. Okay. Yeah. Ergative absolutive systems. Ergative absolutive alignment. This is when you have A marked differently than S and P. I don't know why that happened. All I wanted to do was make it bold. So that's it. That's what ergative absolutive alignment is. So now you can all make ergative absolutive systems. Let's see. There's a bit more. Scrolling down. So you have S, A, and P. Those are our three things. And let's use the forms ta, nu, and so we have three case markers. Ta, nu, and let's say le. What are the different systems that we could come up with? We could come up with a system where S is marked with ta, A is marked with ta, P is marked with nu. This is nominative accusative alignment. Get these over a bit more over here. We could come up with a system where S is marked with nu, A is marked with ta, P is marked with nu. Ergative absolutive. You can maybe see where I'm approaching something here. Okay, what are the other options? Logically we have more options than this, right? Well, we could also have maybe nu, ta, ta. So we group A and P together. So that means when you have a transitive sentence, both participants are marked the same way, and that's different from the way that an intransitive subject is marked. All right, so I should warn you that that's ultra, 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 ultra rare. This has been called double oblique alignment, but I wouldn't be surprised if it had like 50 other names because linguists love naming things. Double oblique. What else could we do? Well, we could just have ta, 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 right? Just make everything the same. This is called neutral alignment. And you could argue that that languages which don't mark case effectively have this. So English in the nouns is neutral, in the pronouns is nominative accusative. This is very common. And what else do we have? Well, we could do ta, or maybe like nu, ta, le. 3 different situations, 3 different cases, tripartite agreement, or tripartite alignment. And that's pretty rare as well, because you can see it's not strictly necessary because you never have both S and A or both S and P in the same sentence. So these are 5 different types of alignment. And it gets worse. It gets more complicated because there are also systems that split different types of these arguments even below the S level. So you have, we've been talking about S, A, and P like they're all the same, but there are some languages, for example, which split the S. So some S's take ta and some S's take nu, depending on what? Depending on how agent-like the intransitive sentence is, or the subject of the intransitive sentence is, and how patient-like it is. So let's look at an example. So if we have, let's make up a new verb for our little language. Let's say bohu. Oops. Yeah, bohu. I realize I did this wrong. That's better. So the owl eats. What would the owl eats be? Let's bring this all the way down so that we can see it on the same screen. The owl eats is going to be, if we have a split S, it's hu something bohu. So if this is a nominative accusative language, this is going to be hu ta bohu, namak. If it's an ergative absolutive language, we would say hu nu bohu. If it's a split S language, what we could have is hu ta bohu, because eating, when you eat something, you're really doing that action. That is something that you are the agent of. So there are some predicates whose subjects are more agent-like. What does it mean for something to be agent-like? Well, when we think about how actions take place in the world, there is often something acting on something else. What do things that act on other things have in common? They have volition. They move around in the world. They're sentient. They're going around enacting their plans. Humans are great examples of things that are often agents, because we're going around, we're chopping down trees, we're punching rocks, we're doing all sorts of stuff. And we have this volition, this sentience, this ability to move and to cause change. So humans are often put in agent position. Not always, right? One human can act on another. So what makes something more of a patient? A patient is something, and we're talking here about this agent versus patient distinction, just to call back to that. What makes something more agent-like is it's sentient, it causes action, it moves, it has volition. What makes something more patient-like? It's that it undergoes a change of state. So if you think of something super agent-like, it would be like a kid throwing a baseball at a window. So the kid is the agent, the window is the patient. The kid broke the window. So the kid is an agent par excellence, sentient, moving around, causing action, willing what it does. And the window is a great example of a prototypical patient because it undergoes a change of state. It has no say in this action. It's not a sentient being at all. It's an inanimate object that just stays put until it gets broken. Now it's important to notice that it's not the case that that boys are, or the kid is always going to be an agent, right? Because the mother could scold the kid. So now we have the kid undergoing a change of state from being maybe happy to being sad. And so taking on more of the characteristics of a patient. Okay, so this is also largely determined by what predicate we're talking about, in this case, what verb we're talking about. So when you eat, you are more agent-like because you're deciding to eat, you're causing the action on the food, you're chewing it up, you're causing a change of state in the food, you're doing this willingly most often, and you are sentient, you're able to, well, you're sentient. I don't know what else to tell you, you're sentient. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news. So in a split S language, because eating is something whose subject is more agent-like, we get the marking like an A. So S equals A. But if we have a verb like, let's make up another verb. Let's make up a verb like to fall. Something like lamu. That seems like fall. So here we'd have something like huhunu lamu, because falling is a kind of action where the subject is not very agent-like usually. The subject undergoes a change of state. Often you fall by accident, not on purpose. So this is S equals P. These predicates where S is more agent-like are called unergative. And again, I deeply apologize for this terminology. And the ones that where the subject is more patient-like are called unaccusative. Again, apologies for the terminology. Okay, so split S. So S can be either A or P, depending on the properties of the predicate. We also have fluid S languages, and it gets a bit weird sounding here, where you would have a distinction between huhuta lamu, the owl fell intentionally, versus huhunu, huhuta, huhunu lamu. So in each case, this is owl, and then a case marking, and then fall, S-A-S-P. And here the change of the case marker indicates that the owl had some sort of control over the event in the case of huhuta lamu, where S is equal to A, and less in the case of huhunu lamu, where S is equal to P. So this is called split S, and this is called fluid S, which is kind of a type of split S. Okay, I think we are now at the point where we can move on. So, sorry, a lot of terminology. Hopefully this can be kind of a reference. Yeah, Logan's totally right. Unergative and unaccusative is one of the all-time worst nomenclatures in all of linguistics. Okay. All right. Okay. Whew. I got through everything, and it only took an absurd amount of time. Let's just think about YouTube quickly. YouTube. Yeah. I had to tell you at some point. I had to mention unergatives and unaccusatives at some point. Today was the day. thank you so much for joining us. Come back and we will do more conlanging and we'll use the terminology that we've acquired in our climbing of Case Mountain. All right.